Hi everyone, and welcome back to my series on how to paint convincing skies in watercolour. And in this video, what I'm going to do is share with you some simple tips and techniques, some strategies that will help you to take what you observe when you look at the sky and translate that into your landscape paintings. And then we'll move on to colour. And I will show you the colours that I use for the vast majority of my skies and some of the subtle variations that I use depending on the type of sky that I want to paint. If you stick around till the end, then I will show you how to avoid green skies. It's not as complicated as you think, and it's very, very easy to avoid that. So hang around, I'll show you how we deal with that particular problem. Okay, I'm going to do a quick painting of this sky. It's early evening, the sun's just setting to the left-hand side of me and casting this nice warm glow on the clouds above Ballard Down in Swanage Bay. Now, to paint this sky successfully, I need to paint it with confidence and I need to be decisive with my brushstrokes. And in order to achieve that, you need to be methodical in your thinking before you've gone anywhere near your piece of paper. I'm thinking about the layers in the sky. I can see them quite clearly here. There's a blue that transitions down through this sort of warm grey into a nice sort of peachy pinky colour by the horizon. It's slightly cooler and darker on this side than it is on this side, which is starting to become warmer and moving more towards a grey. On top of the base layer is this lovely bank of cloud. It's a combination of sort of dusty pinks and soft purples here. And then there's a nice highlight that runs through here on part of the cloud where the sun's just catching it. And by taking a methodical approach, I'm thinking about colour mixing. What is the best combination of primaries that I can deploy to achieve these colours? How am I going to ensure that I capture this little area of highlight through here, which is tonally almost identical to the other colours around it, but a more vivid, brighter hue? What is the best sequence of washes that I can use to help me capture this nice soft effect? Methodical thinking and planning is so important in watercolour painting, no more so than when you're painting a sky. You might often see professional painters launching into their skies with complete abandon. You think, well, that's just remarkable that they're able to capture things so easily, so quickly, with almost no thought at all. But that's never happening. All these thoughts are in the mind all the time. The only difference here is that I'm articulating them and breaking them down, bringing them to your attention so that you can find a way of thinking your way round your paintings too. So I'm going to get started on a quarter sheet block of, I think this is Langton Prestige paper. Yes, it is. And with skies, one of the most important things is to use as large a brush as you possibly can. Here's a selection of ones that I use regularly. This is a size 6 synthetic mop brush. This is a size 6 squirrel hair brush, size 12 sable, and a 1-inch Harkay brush. And one of the things that they have in common is that they're all very soft. And for me, that's important when I'm painting skies. It helps me to get nice, smooth transitions of colours, and it enables you to minimise the brush strokes that are left on the paper. One of the things that I find most helpful when I'm painting skies is to have my colours mixed and ready on the palette. Okay, they're going to mix together a little bit as I apply them to the paper, but have them there ready at the outset. And as I'm going to be working wet on wet, I know that these colours, not only will they fade as they dry, but they will dilute in the water that is already on the paper. So I have to keep that in mind. And that's where having some scrap paper just to test out your colours and to get an idea of how strong they're going to be is very, very useful. It saves you from diving in and being unprepared. And wait till it dries so that you can judge the tone accurately. There's no harm in doing that at all. So I'm just wetting the paper here with this soft Harkay brush. And often when I'm painting a sky like this, I like to use two brushes. It just makes things easier. It saves me having to keep washing a brush out. And I tend to put in the warmer colour first, and it may need to be a bit stronger than that. I'll just put that in at the horizon. Yes, it definitely needs to be stronger. I can see that. I can just judge that as that dries, it's going to dry a little bit lighter than I would want. So that's better. So I'll put some close to the horizon and just phase it out as I get higher up the sky. My board is flat here. That helps the paint to stay where I want it to be without it running down the paper. Then I'll use some of this warmer colour. Just allow those two to merge together. And then as we come towards the top of the paper, I'll add more of the blue. I'm leaving a gap in here because I want to put some more of the orange colour just through there. Like so. I'm going to add a little bit more blue into the right-hand corner. You can see that it's a lot stronger on this side. The sun is to the left, and so the sky is paler or brighter on that side of the painting. We looked at that in the last video. It's important to observe and capture things like that. Now, because I've wet this paper and I've put wet paint on top, it's going to stay wet for quite a while, and that gives me time to prepare the colour that I need for the clouds. So I'm going to mix a slightly more concentrated version of a warm pinky grey. And I want a cooler version too, which I'm going to keep over here, just so I sort of know where they are. And that will be for some of the other shadow areas. And as I'm looking at the paper, it's still very wet. It's too wet to put these clouds on because they won't hold their shape. They will just disappear into this background wash, which represents the base layer to the sky that we talked about last time. So timing is very important here. Watch the paper, see how shiny it is. At the moment it's very glossy, and I've got to wait for that gloss to start disappearing and just become a dull sheen before I approach it with these other clouds. And timing is vital, because if I leave it too long, I could create runbacks by putting in wetter clouds on top. So it requires judgment, and that's the sort of judgment that only really comes through doing. You need to do these exercises and to have a look at it and interact with it yourself to get a feel for how dry the paper is, how concentrated the wash is that you're going to put into an already damp area or wet area of paper. Okay, now I'm using a smaller brush here because it holds a lot less paint, and I don't want paint cascading everywhere as I drop in these clouds. You can see they're broken here, and I just want a few shapes. It's a little darker under here. I want to leave that nice golden area in the sky that's shining through. Where the sun's just catching the top of this cloud, I want that to be there. You can see that these marks that I'm making are starting to grip in the base layer. It's just wet enough for them not to run back, but it's also dry enough for these to hold their shape. And I can go back to my large brush now because I've got an area to fill in at the bottom here, and I don't want to be fiddling around unnecessarily with a small brush. Now, it's difficult to paint this way if you haven't stretched your paper, because what's happening is the undulations in the paper are creating different levels of dryness across the surface. So here, for example, the paper is higher and either side is a trough, and so pigment and water tends to run into these areas, so they're damper, whereas this area here, and this area here are slightly drier. This is why I stretch my paper, so that I can work as wet as I need to without having issues like this that can be a bit unpredictable. I can see them happening and I know how to work with them, but it's very easy for these things to trip you up. So I would recommend always stretching your paper if you can. Now what I want to show you is two ways of doing the same thing, and that is to put a little bit of extra shadow into the sky, and it needs to be quite concentrated. I'm using the same three colours, but they need to be quite sticky. And again, as this is damp, if I want to put a stronger shadow somewhere, let's say here, for example, I can put that in and it's just going to hold its shape and it shouldn't give me any run back issues. Again, I could do one here too, for example. Let's have one there. Now the thing is, we are at the point here where the paper is just perfect for doing this, but within 10-15 seconds you may not be able to do this anymore. That's how precise the timing sometimes needs to be. Also, if my mix of paint was not concentrated enough, we could have had a run back occurring here too. So if you're unsure about the timing, let me show you how you can fine-tune the sky and to remove the risk of creating unwanted shapes and runbacks and cauliflowers, whatever you want to call them. And the way that I'll do that is allow it to dry completely. I've allowed the paper now to dry completely, and I'm going to show you how to fine-tune the sky if you think that's what it needs. Now that the paper's dry, I can re-wet it, and then any other colour that I may wish to drop in is only going to run into clear water. There is no other pigment that's damp, wet, or at any stage of the drying process to be disturbed. It's all here, it's all dry. And that gives you a more relaxed and a more risk-free way of making fine adjustments to the sky at a critical point in its drying process. So I'll re-wet this area of sky again. So let's imagine you wanted a softer area of cloud somewhere around here. I've re-wet the paper and I can use some of this mix here. And I can just drop a soft shadow in here. Now this would be far too wet in consistency to drop into an area of paint that was drying. However, because all I'm doing is dropping it into water, there's no chance of this creating a run back. There's nothing to push out of the way other than clear water. And so I can put in this soft area of cloud here. And I can blend it in. And I've added a little bit more detail, a little bit more interest to the sky. Risk-free. No risk of runbacks here at all. Now, of course, if I wanted to continue putting more pigment into here as this was drying, then yes, there is going to be some risk because I've now put paint in that area. Now, when it comes to painting your sky in more than one wash, there are some drawbacks to doing that. And I painted the base layer and put those clouds over the top. I've now put in this bit of detail here. And you get tempted into thinking, well,
this is great, let's keep going. So, you know, you get a little bit more orange, and some orange goes in here, and you think, okay, well, that's good. I could let that dry up and re-wet it again and do some more. And actually, what about some cloud here? That'd be rather nice. Oh, I'll tell you what, wouldn't it be nice actually if we had some sort of thundery clouds up in the top here? Oh yeah, that, you know, that really adds something to it. Now the sky seems a bit unbalanced, so I probably need to put something in over here. Yeah, that's better. I like this. I like this pinky orange. It's a really nice colour. So I think I might have a bit more in the sky as well. Yeah, that's quite nice. And before you know it, you've started to lose the freshness in your sky. It starts to become a little bit too detailed, a little bit too cluttered. And that's the thinking behind the one wash approach to a sky. It prevents you from doing this sort of fiddling and unnecessary work, and allows you to be a lot more dynamic in your approach to painting skies. I want to show you an approach to blending which helps you to create nice transitions in a sky. So let's imagine I put a cloud in here, for example. It's okay, but it looks a bit abrupt, bit obvious. Now, with a very damp brush, and I'm taking the moisture out here on a piece of kitchen paper, so that it just really feels cool on the back of my hand there. I can run it underneath the cloud and then take out what I've picked up, wipe it out onto the paper. Otherwise, you're distributing colour perhaps into places where you may not want it to go. And in doing this, you're softening the shape and allowing it to blend into the other layers that you've already painted. And it's a great technique. And this is what skies are often like. They're not full of abrupt transitions, but more smooth passages where lights and darks blend softly together. And being able to use this technique in your skies is very, very helpful. Now, there's another technique I wanted to show you, and I did mention it, and it's whether or not we can lift out areas of the sky. This is almost too dry to do it, but it should just be okay. So let's imagine we wanted a nice bright area coming through here, and you know, we've already painted the wash on. You can take a flat brush like this and wipe it through the painting, lift areas out. I tend not to do this. I don't favour this technique because it can lead to pigment building up on the area that you've wiped out. And also, inevitably, the area that you are wiping out does retain some pigment. So it will always be less than white if that's what you wanted to achieve. But it can be useful if you want to create clean shapes like this, where you want lighter areas of the sky. It can be useful. But you can see right here that brush stroke that I put through there with a damp brush has allowed pigment to be pushed either side of that brush stroke, which is an effect that I wasn't looking for. I don't think this result here looks as good as the result here, where I left that area deliberately. I had planned that out before I painted the sky, and I allowed my blue and my warm grey to be painted around that. To me, that's a far more satisfactory solution. But I will leave that up to you. None of this is right or wrong. This is just my preferred way of doing it. This, not so much. Okay, so this time round, I'm going to be painting a cloudy sky, and in order to be decisive with the washes that I'm making, which is really important when you're painting skies, it's important to be methodical. And the way that I'm methodical is preparing my colours that I need beforehand, thinking about how I'm going to paint this sky, and I want a few hard edges in this one, so I'm not going to be painting it wet in wet. I'm going to be allowing some of the colours to merge together, but I won't be wetting the paper first. That means I need to focus on the concentration of these colours, and they don't need to be quite as strong as if I was painting wet on wet, because they're not going to be diluted when I put them on the paper. Also, when I'm painting skies wet on dry, I like to have the board at a little bit of an angle. It helps me to work the bead of paint down the paper. I've thought about the brushes I'm going to need. I'm using this large mop brush as one to put my darker colours on, the blue and the grey shadow colour. And I'm using this old sable, which is nice and soft. It doesn't have much of a point anymore, but it's nice for putting on clear water into areas of the sky and for blending shapes together. And these decisions are important. Think about them before you start on the sky. Don't go anywhere near your paper unless you have everything resolved in your mind beforehand. So here we go. Let's start off with some blue sky. And like I said, I want some hard edges to the tops of these clouds. It just creates some nice texture. But I don't want that everywhere, so I'm going to use my sable brush that is damp. It's got quite a bit of water in it actually, and I'm just going to soften off some of these edges. I keep rinsing the brush out. I'm putting more water in this area of clouds here because I want to introduce some of this warmer colour. I'm imagining the sun's catching the right hand side of these clouds. I'm allowing it to touch in that area of blue. It just helps them to run together. I'll take out the hard edge on this side because what I want to do now is drop in some of the shadow colour. In a sky like this, it's good to have a crisp edge sometimes on the highlight side of your cloud, but to soften that off on the shadow side too. I'm just allowing this all now to run together. Leave some little flecks of white in the sky, that suggests clouds. As you can see, I'm working this bead of paint down the paper. Let's put a darker shadow there. And then with my sable, again with some clear water, I'm just going to soften the area on the bottom edge of this cloud. And I'm imagining smaller clouds further in the distance. We can have a hard edge there, I think that's fine. One there, again, that's quite nice. And a combination of dry paper and wet areas gives me this nice contrast in textures and shapes within the sky. Let's put a bit more shadow in, but we'll cool it down because it's further away. Finish up with a warm colour along the bottom. again, let's get into there with a damp brush. Have a piece of kitchen paper ready just to take off some of the pigment that you pick up. I don't like doing too much lifting out. It doesn't quite create the right look. Let's just blend that through there. Gives a nice soft transition. As this is starting to dry up here, I'm just going to drop in darker shadow on that left-hand side. Same there. Then allow that to blend and to run together. And there we are. It's a nice cloudy sky. It didn't take too long to paint it, but because I thought about the process beforehand, I was able to work nice and quickly, nice and dynamically. And being decisive with your skies is very important. Now, often the temptation at this stage is to think, well, that's really good, and give yourself a nice big self-congratulatory slap on the back, go and put the kettle on, watch some cricket or something like that. But don't be tempted to do so. Stay and keep an eye on what's going on here, because the paint is just starting to dry and it will still be making decisions on where it wants to settle on the paper. Watch it like a hawk, because something may develop that you're not entirely happy with, and with either a damp brush or the judicious use of a piece of kitchen paper, don't use it too much, you could actually avoid runbacks or blooms happening that you may not want to. So keep an eye on it, but try not to get involved with it if you possibly can. If you can put the paint down on the paper in a decisive way and leave it alone, your skies are going to have a freshness and an immediacy about them that is really quite attractive. So that's a quick walk through some of the basic techniques, some of the most important principles that you need to consider when painting skies. Let's now have a play around with some colours, and I will show you my preferred combinations and mixes, and have a look at those and make a decision as to whether or not that's something that you could use too. And it may not be. I'm only using these colours because I understand them, I've used them for years, they work for me, and I paint British landscapes which are often bathed in cool northern light. If you're painting Mediterranean scenes, for example, you may wish to consider an alternative set of pigments that works better for you and helps you to capture the feel of the landscapes that you paint. So none of this is right and wrong, it's just what works for me, and hopefully it'll give you some guidance on things to look for when you consider the colours that you want to use in your palette. So let's have a look at some of my go-to colours that I use time and again for skies. And the reason I use them is that they give me repeatable results and the consistency that I want. I know that as the colours run together on the palette, as the colours run together on the paper, I'm not going to get any nasty surprises. More often than not, for a blue, I'm starting off with cobalt. And I'd like you to have a go at this because it's a good way of learning what colours do. Just take some cobalt blue, put it onto the paper, leave a nice bead there. This is good practice anyway. And then the red that I use more often than not is cadmium red. And the reason being, when cadmium red and cobalt blue are mixed together, they will make a warm grey that doesn't need an additional colour to modify it. I don't really need to put yellow into this to stop it going too purple. The cadmium yellow and the cobalt blue together make a nice warm grey. I use this a lot for cloud shadow, particularly in evenings, and just allow these colours to run together and you will see the type of thing that happens when you use these colours in the sky. Now, If I want that to become a warmer grey, I can mix in raw sienna. Now, raw sienna is the other colour that I like to use in my skies. Just let these merge together. And this shape that's nothing in particular is just allowing me to explore what happens when these colours mix together, because this is how I paint skies. I allow these colours to run around on the palette. Okay, I might have cooler colours here and warmer colours here, but inevitably they all get a little bit mixed up as I'm painting. But I know all these little in-between hues that are created will be what I'm looking for in the sky. I think that was a bit of ultramarine, never mind. But yeah, I can get quite dark with this as well, you see. And put in darker clouds if I need to. Do this again, play around with little exercises like this, because now what I'm doing, I'm not just thinking about colour, I'm watching timing. I'm putting in a more concentrated wash. Have a look what happens if you put it into areas that are almost dry, like this one, for example. Just doesn't run out quite as much. Add some more red in, get a very concentrated, warm colour. And by making little doodles like this, you're learning so much more about your colours and the way that they blend together. You're observing what's happening. You're seeing the way that these colours all run together. You're creating a huge range of different hues, but you know what they are going to create to a certain extent. And it means that when you start to paint your favourite landscape, you're going to be less prone to panicking, because you've done this before. You know the way these all work together. Use it as an opportunity to try out some different brush strokes too. And then make some notes. So I know that this was cobalt, cadmium red, and raw sienna. Keep it. Refer to it if you need to. But for me, these three colours are the base of most of my skies. Here's another trinity of colours that I like to use. I'm going to start off here with Naples yellow. It's quite an opaque pigment. It's not good for glazing because you want a transparent pigment, or as much as possible for that. But I often like to use Naples yellow for contre-jour scenes, or scenes that are backlit, as the French would say. And into that, a little bit of permanent rose is nice, and you can get some wonderful, soft evening colours by working with Naples yellow and permanent rose. I've used this regularly in paintings. And then when you add some cobalt blue into that, you can produce some wonderful greys too. And can you see the difference between the two here? This is a lot more punchy. This has got a sort of daylight look of blue skies, white clouds, warm and cool shadows, whereas this is entirely different. This is evening or misty situations where the sky is a lot more subtle, a lot more muted. It really does throw up some wonderful combinations. See what's not to like about that combination. And again, note it down. Naples yellow. Permanent rose. Cobalt blue. Now let me just show you a final combination that works well for me. That's French ultramarine. Out of the palette like this, it can be a bit fierce, so you sometimes need to calm it down a little bit. But let's just put it on as it is. Let's stick some ultramarine down. And then light red. A little bit of light red just works wonders in calming down this powerful colour of French ultramarine. Can you see there? It's a subtle difference, but it's there. It's a little bit more manageable. And I like using this combination in autumn skies because, again, the light red and the ultramarine together can create this wonderful soft grey without the need to introduce any yellow. I'm not a fan of crimson alizarin, which often creates a very purpley grey and usually needs a yellow to modify it. I don't need to with these two colours. I can get as warm as I like without this starting to look as though it's in any way pink or purple. And I've talked about the sky having an impact on the landscape below, and often during the autumn season these colours, they're there in the landscape. Add some raw sienna back in, gives you a lovely colour for the highlights on the edges of clouds, for example. And I can get a very nice dark from this as well. There we are. Now, I don't have a particular aversion to using Payne's Grey or neutral tint in my skies. I've done it on many occasions, but I just find it's not really necessary. I can achieve the darks that I'm looking for just from my three primaries, if I think about it carefully. And over the years, I've come to know exactly what these can achieve. So there we are. Let's record it again. Ultramarine. Light red. Raw sienna. So these are my three main groupings of primary colours that I use for my skies. And they're interchangeable to a certain extent, but it just seems that these are the ones that I go to more often than not. Interestingly, I noticed that I've just spelt raw sienna incorrectly. I'm not quite sure what raw sienna is. Maybe it should be my proprietary pigment. Interesting. You heard it here first. Don't nick my idea. And I spelt it right there, so that's fine. Raw sienna, great colour to use. Light red, cadmium red, ultramarine, cobalt, and then some Naples yellow, some permanent rose. These combinations are ones that I've used so many times. I understand them. I know what they're going to look like as they start running together on the palette and on the paper. Use whatever primaries you want to paint your skies. They don't have to be the same ones that I use. Whatever pigments you choose and whichever combinations you decide to work with, make sure you play around and do little exercises like this. And do it regularly so you can understand the way that they interact with each other. Don't just do these wet on dry as I've done. Do the same thing but on a wet piece of paper and see how the colours run together. See whether they granulate strongly or whether or not you can achieve a nice smooth effect with them. Look at how easily they run out when you drop them onto a wet piece of paper. All these things are important to explore outside of a landscape painting. These little drills, these little exercises are so important. I recommend that you have a go at them. Now, I promised that I'd show you how we avoid painting green skies, and it's a problem that many of those who are learning to paint watercolour will encounter. I did when I was learning too. And I'll show you how not to do it, or I'll show you how it is achieved, I should say. So I've got a nice mix here of French ultramarine. I'm just painting wet onto dry here. And because I'm an observant and sophisticated painter, I'm not painting the same tone all the way down. I'm lightening that up. So yeah, that's pretty progressive. See that? So the blue's not as intense, and therefore when I transition into the yellow, I shouldn't have this problem with green, should I? But hang on a minute, it's looking rather green. And I don't get it because the sky looks yellow, or people tell me that the sky looks yellow as I come down towards the horizon, and it's blue above it, but it's green. It's quite clearly gone from blue to green. Now there's a few things going on here. The first of which was the colour that I used as my yellow. I'd used cadmium yellow, and in fact I'd warmed it up with a little bit of permanent rose as well, but it is entirely the wrong colour to use in a sky. It is a neutral to cool yellow, and when mixed with a blue, even though ultramarine is a warm blue, it's going to create green. I use this to paint trees, not skies. So that's the first thing that's not quite right. The second thing is that skies don't go from blue to yellow. If you have a look at a number of the skies that I've painted that are cloudless skies like this, often on a beautiful evening where it's blue at the top and it comes down into this warm golden colour at the horizon, it's not just going from blue to yellow, it is going through a third colour in the middle. And this is often missed. And this is how I resolved the problem of painting green skies when I was learning how to paint. And I'll show you how I do it. What I realised by looking at my paintings and putting a piece of white paper along the top of the sky and along the bottom of the sky was that there was a third colour in the middle. So I had my warm colour at the horizon, I had my blue at the top of the sky, but there was this sort of murky grey colour in between. So I thought, well, why don't I mix all three and see what happens if I paint like that? So let's start with the blue. Again, French ultramarine. And then as I move down the paper, I'll just pick up a little bit of this colour instead. Still blue. But can you see it's starting to become grey? I'd get to that point. I wash my brush out and pick up some of this yellow colour and just warm that up a little bit. Keep coming down the sky. Wash my brush out and now go into the yellow. Keep it coming down the paper. You can use two brushes for this. If you want to keep a brush that's nice and clean just for your yellow, do so. And hopefully you can see what's happened. We've gone from blue at the top to this warm yellow colour at the bottom, but it has transitioned through a graded grey, which is cooler at the top and warmer at the bottom. And that's how you get a sky that looks like a clear blue sky of an evening that's getting warmer near the horizon. The old blue to yellow, as people call it. Well, it's nothing of the sort, really. If you're thinking blue and yellow, you will get green skies like this. And also keep in mind that the yellow that I've used here was completely different too. I used raw sienna, which is a lovely bright colour. I would mention that the colour that I use from De La Rowney is a lot brighter and more yellow than a number of other manufacturers, but it's also mixed with a little bit of permanent rose, and it is far less prone to create green when mixed with blue. If you don't have this grey in the middle, It will still do that, however. I use ultramarine and raw sienna to paint trees, and mixed together it does make green. But in the context of a sky, when you've got some other reds mixed into this to create the grey, then you're going to find it's a lot more difficult to create green. Well, thanks ever so much for watching, and I hope you found that helpful. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please click on the subscribe button. There's a little bell icon next to it as well. If you click on that, then you get a notification each time I post a new video. And of course, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. Click on the little thumbs up icon. That's also very helpful and much appreciated. Why don't you have a go at some of those little exercises that I worked through in the video? Play around with them yourself and start to familiarise yourself with some of those techniques. I hope you'll be able to join us for the next video when we're going to have a look at what happens where sky meets land and the interaction at the horizon level, and how we can manage the edges that sometimes collide at that point in the landscape. We'll also have a look at how we can use the sky and design elements within the sky to help us achieve certain compositional outcomes in our painting too. But that's it for now, so happy painting. I look forward to seeing you next time.